Welcome to Bless Your Heart, a special segment of Sunday Night Live where verses are stitched back into context with some love. I am your host, Trenton Barksdale, and I look forward to enjoying some time with you. Let's sit for a while.
Hi everybody, welcome back to Bless Your Heart. In this episode, we will discuss a verse often taken out of context in the Catholic Church. In fact, this verse is perhaps the verse that, when put in context with proper understanding, is the Achilles heel of Catholicism. This is John chapter 6, verse 54. Let's read the verse and then consider some observations. John chapter 6, verse 54 says, "He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day." I said a moment ago that Catholics like to take this verse out of context. They do so in order to affirm what's called, quote, the real presence of Jesus, meaning they say Jesus is bodily and physically present in the elements of the Eucharist, or, as other religious groups call it, the Lord's Supper, or communion. The Church also attempts to employ the Greek word trogo and its usage in saying that Jesus says to eat his literal flesh and drink his literal blood. They will even go so far as to quote the early church fathers in attempts to solidify their position. However, an honest look at both sources shows something completely different. Let's understand something about John chapter 6, starting in verse 26. Jesus calls out the Jews who came to him for being focused on the food they could literally eat. He tells them to work for spiritual food and repeatedly tells them that they need to believe on him. He tells them how he is the bread of life, the spiritual food that they are to work for. When he tells them how his flesh is what they are to eat in verse 51, the Jews' mindset is exposed for us to see. Listen here. This is John chapter 6, picking up in verse 52. Then the Jews began to argue with one another, saying, "How can this man give us his flesh to eat?" So Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in yourselves. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him up on the last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. He who eats my flesh and drinks my blood abides in me, and I in him. As the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so he who eats me, he also will live because of me. This is the bread which came down out of heaven, not as the fathers ate and died. He who eats this bread will live forever." In these verses, their mind is still focused on what they can physically eat. Though he doubles down on how he is the spiritual food that one must eat to have eternal life, it shows a harsh truth that not many people want to admit. People are so focused on what they can get out of Christ physically, not realizing that they can get something worth so much more, spiritually speaking. After he even tells them that the words he speaks are what gives spiritual life, many of the ones who came to follow Jesus left him for good. What about us? Would we do the same thing if we were simply following Jesus just to get a physical benefit? If that's why we are a Christian, then we are going about it the wrong way. May God help all of us to labor for the food that endures to eternal life and consume it every day through belief in Jesus and feeding on his words. By doing so, we find true nourishment, far better than any physical bread that could be made and eaten. Thank you for your kind attention, and God bless.
Which verse do you think we should consider next? Comment below or send us a message on Facebook or Discord with your suggestions. Y'all come back now. Here